Today, I'm interviewing Geoff Achison. So, morning, Geoff. It's morning.
Hello, Vic.
Good morning with you.
Afternoon here on the other side of the planet.
Cool. And my first question is, what do you do?
I play guitar and I sing, and I make up songs. And this has been my job for the last, it's nearly 40 years.
Yeah. We're obviously, that's weird. There's suddenly a whole load of traffic going past this. I'm in the office here at the moment.
Oh, okay.
And, it is Sunday morning, but for some reason there's life outside, which is a bit weird. Yeah, so 40 years.
Mm.
Yeah. So the first question is about music as well, and now you've sort of said what you do.
Yeah.
How did you start getting involved in music?
Well, look, my dad played trumpet in the local brass band, so we were around music a lot. And growing up, Dad quite often of an evening pull the horn out and play through his scales and stuff like that. And look, we loved the music. We used to sing the marching band music, sing ourselves to sleep with that, my brother and I, after a day out, with the band at the Rotunda and whatever, and we'd be mucking about. And so I was keen to play an instrument. I was keen to learn how to play. And I had a go at several instruments, which included drums, trumpet, saxophone, even harmonica. I got given a little harmonica for my 8th birthday or something. But I didn't stick with any of them. It was just sort of mucking around on them, really. But then I found the guitar, which had belonged to my mum.
Right. So what age is this?
I was about 9, I think, and this was just an instrument that hung in the closet underneath the stairs.
Yeah.
Which is kind of like the similar space to what Harry Potter lived in, I guess.
Oh yeah. But, so this is a magical input then.
Yeah. And it was, for a young kid, you'd go into this closet under the stairs, and it was full of trunks and old clothes and bits and bobs.
Hang on a minute, I've just lost you.
See, you're moving to a quieter space.
Yes, that's what I was doing. Right, okay, carry on, because there was so much traffic noise out there, I couldn't believe it for a Sunday morning.
I'll back up a bit so you can maybe edit.
Yeah. So we got to the Harry Potter cupboard under the stairs and the guitar.
Yeah. No, it was a magical space for a young kid, because you'd go into that closet space. It was quite large. It was a big old house, and it was full of trunks and old clothes and all the family junk sort of wound up down. There's really musty, but you could go. It's very dark, but you'd sort of go in and explore and pull bits and pieces out and play with them as kids. That's where we'd get the dress ups. Dad's old wedding suit and stuff like that. There was a guitar. This really old guitar which had belonged to my mum. She'd got it for her 15th birthday, and she'd never learnt to play it. And I started messing around on that. And I got sprung by the old man one day. He must have heard me, and they heard the sort of plunking on the strings, and the doors opened, and he's looked at me, and I thought I was in big trouble. But I'm sitting there on this tin trunk with the guitar, and but he said, "Do you want to learn how to play that?" And the next thing I knew, I was being sent off to guitar lessons with a local guy. Used to be $1 a lesson, and he showed me how to form chords and how to tune it up, and he showed me this little he got me finger picking. That was one of the very first things that he showed me, was how to finger pick with this simple pattern. And I didn't continue with it, because then he was teaching me how to read, and I always had a lot of trouble with the dots. I couldn't follow them. They just started to dance around on the page. So
I'm just gonna chip in there, because that is such an interesting thing, and it comes up time and time again. That is almost like a form of dyslexia.
Right. Yeah, maybe.
It's weird, because then, of course, what happens is you start using your ear.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it changes everything, doesn't it? You know.
Yeah. Well, the fact that he got me going, and I don't know what the difference was, but because I'd learned a little bit of saxophone, a little bit of trumpet, got the basics of those, but it never felt natural on those. But once I got the gist of how the guitar worked, you just couldn't get it out of my hands. I just played and played and played and played it, and I started going through Dad's music books, which would have the chords written over the top of the music. And a lot of the songs I didn't know. I didn't know what the songs were, but I'd just play through the chord progressions. And thankfully for me, Dad had cases full of these books that he would use, not just for the brass band, but the little dance bands that he used to play in. And I'd just play through all these chord progressions. And now and again, strike a chord I didn't know. Look it up.
This is fascinating, because in actual fact, that is so similar to what happened with me. Now, my dad played piano, but he didn't read. But we used to have some friends who used to have like maybe like electric sort of keyboard type thing. But they'd always have these books of like dance band music with chords, and of course the chords were always ridiculous. So I got into playing these crazy songs in keys that weren't suitable for guitar.
Oh yeah, B flat and E flat.
Yeah, and E flat, and that was incredible. And so I think that's something, again, which, if you think about it, a kid now starting off wouldn't spend ages thumping through loads of rhythm guitar stuff. Which is a sad really, because I think it's so important.
Well, I think it gave me a good grounding, because that wound up being my first gig. My dad got me to play in his little dance band, because he was absolutely thrilled that one of his kids was learning to play. And I used to read the chords over the piano player's shoulder. Just read. Everyone thought I could read music, but I'm just following the chords over the top. And that was my grounding was not. It's not just that it was rhythm guitar, but it was all those crazy keys, like you say.
It's good, isn't it? It was. And I think that's interesting, because there was so much more of that sort of material knocking around. That's silly to say that, because you can get anything now, but because there was such a limit of other stuff. Everything else was limited, wasn't it? You couldn't buy a decent music book of rock stuff anyway.
The hits of the day, and I think that was probably an element that also had me turn away from learning how to read music, because not only was I finding it difficult to follow it, but I didn't have that much incentive to learn it, because they were just silly little tunes.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas we're hearing the Sweet on the radio and Led Zeppelin and all this fantastic rock music.
Funny you should say the sweet, because I just interviewed a guy last week. In fact, I've had to do the interview in two parts because it went on for so long and we only got to about 1980.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. But he actually played for what's his name, Connolly, one of the singers, isn't it? Because they had the AS, was it A something or other, AC Suite and something like that. It's when Suite broke up, they were two separate.
Right.
He played guitar for one of them. But yeah, it's funny you should say Suite because I met Nicky Chin, Chin and Chapman,
right,
the songwriters for Suite.
Right. Well, because I'm speaking to I'm speaking to an Englishman. I tried to think of an English band that was a big hit down here at the time. Yeah. Of course, we had the early AC/DC, and we had bands that Australian bands, Sherbet and Skyhooks and stuff like that, which people outside of Australia would not have heard of, apart from Academic.
Yeah. But no, so the point then was presumably you were working this stuff out by ear.
And like you say, there would be chords that I didn't know that would turn up on the music as well, and then you just have to use your ear to sort of fake it till you make it.
Totally.
Yeah.
That's an interesting thing, that, because I often sort of say to the kids about, when you work things out off a record, you couldn't always nail it, because if it was on vinyl and you slowed it down, it becomes a dirge, doesn't it? Yeah. And then it becomes a little bit of guesswork.
Yeah.
What is that? And I remember working some stuff out once by Roy Buchanan.
Right. Yeah.
And it was the track was called Tribute to Elmore James, and I got the whole damn thing down apart from about 4 bars.
Yeah.
And I couldn't work out what he was doing. He was doing something probably. I think now I get what he was doing. He was probably bending the strings behind the nut.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. Sure.
But I couldn't work out what the hell he was doing on this particular bit, and it drove me mad. I couldn't get this last 4 bars. But then after a while, I began to realise actually that was the only bit really that had my input in it, because I had to guess.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And I thought, in reflection, that was an important bit, really, of just not quite nailing what it was he had, but doing a little bit of a spin of your own.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important thing that we've sort of lost. Because, as you say, there'd be sort of chords you think, what the heck is that?
Well, there was a lot of mystery to it.
Yeah.
And I now think, while it used to drive me crazy at the time, trying to figure it out, that's something I kind of miss. While it's fantastic that, like, anything you want to know is there at a touch of a button. You want to know it's there. It's instant. So instant. Yeah. Any song you want to learn, someone's on the internet that will show you exactly how it's done and what gear was used to get the sounds and so on. Whereas back then, I spent a lot of time when I finally got my electric guitar trying to figure out how, like, wah-wah pedal. I didn't know what a wah-wah pedal was. So you'd hear these recordings of whether it was early Cream or Jimi Hendrix, and do this scratchy thing where I'd mute the strings and feel like, I'm just not good enough to make it sound like the guys. I had no idea there was a pedal involved.
No, I've got a story about that in a minute as well.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Carry on.
Yeah. So that was, but look, I took that into my what became my professional career, where once I did discover pedals and effects, I did buy some and I messed around with them, but I had developed a few of these techniques that I think I felt that doing it physically was more challenging, but it was more fun in a lot of ways to actually have to manipulate the guitar in different ways. And I became a huge fan of people like Roy Buchanan, Steve Beck, who yeah would tend to manhandle their guitars,
Yeah, exactly.
you know, to get them to do these crazy things. And Jimi Hendrix, of course, with minimal effects,
Yeah, that's
playing
right. I tell you the story. I tell you the story of this. I actually sort of recounted this on another podcast, but I knew a guy who used to work for Vox, Jennings.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And he said that well, he was I knew him as a DJ, but he was in the factory when Charlie Watkins brought in the Vox wah wah pedal that he just made.
Okay.
And he brings it in. He goes, "Look, guys, look, I've done this." And he puts the pedal on the floor and plugs it in and does this. And they go, "Yeah." And he goes, "No, that's amazing. Look," and it's like they just didn't get it. But Charlie, it's a tone pot in a box, right? And he goes, "No, it's great. It's great." And then they gave one to Jimi Hendrix.
Right.
And then and then suddenly everybody buys. It all starts off. But I just thought that was brilliant. It's just like nobody got it until Hendrix got it.
Yeah.
But, and I think that's the interesting thing with all of this. As you said, there was this mystery about it.
Yeah.
And we've lost that mystery, unfortunately.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's great. Like you see these kids, they pop up on the internet all the time where they're playing the solo from Eruption, Eddie Van Halen's Eruption. And they're 3 years old.
Yes. I know. Yeah,
you see that sort of stuff all the time.
Yeah.
Which is great and it's amazing. But look, we've been seeing that sort of thing since the arrival of the internet and YouTube and Facebook. We've been seeing that sort of thing for the last 15 years on the daily feed. But how many of those kids doing that sort of thing at such a young age, which is incredible to watch, but how many of them have become the next innovative, inventive,
actually,
amazing composer?
I don't know if you have ever experienced this sort of close at hand, but I was gigging when I was about 20, and we used to do a lot of the venues around, sort of South London and the Midway towns. There's a lot of music venues around there, and there was a band called the Major Setback Band, and it had this young guitarist called, I think his name was Chris. I can't remember his surname. He was 12.
Yeah. Oh, right.
And he was like jaw dropping. And for a couple of years, they were going around doing the same venues as us, and the guy didn't get any better.
Oh, right. Interesting.
And it was quite interesting because it was like, you plateau when you're playing anyway. But it was like suddenly everybody's thinking this guy is like going to be blah blah blah, and I've met a few people like that when you saw them, you just thought, either that is the most amazing thing I've ever seen, and then they just disappear, and you think, what is that? What's going on there? It's peculiar. So. In answer to that, I
don't know what happens, but it's probably there's probably as many stories that explains that as there are these prodigious kids that you see, and there's hundreds of them that and people send me videos and say, "Look at this kid, isn't this amazing?" Which it is. It truly is. But just why they don't carry on? I'm sure there are some that do carry on to having a professional career of some kind, but once they lose that cute factor, they're at this day and age. You're just another person with a guitar on the internet.
Which brings me to a point, really. I think because you've raised this, and I've not really sort of thought about. I thought about this, but we've not this is not something I've spoken about on a podcast. Would you say that there needs to be there's another skill that somebody needs, like a creative skill, that's not necessarily about just being able to play something? There's sort of I don't want to use the word X factor, but you know what I mean, is that there's another quality that is required for a musician, other than just being able to wow people with your version of, your eruption or.
Well, I can tell you what comes up time and again, Vic, with so I do a bit of teaching, a bit of coaching and mentoring, and what comes up time and again is I have students that I find are so focused on where to put their fingers, what scale to play, what chords go with this, what other chords should I learn, what other mode could I put into that. And they're so focused on that what's been forgotten has been that, all right, what do you want to say?
Yes.
What's your message? What do you want to say with this? And I spend as much time as I can. Sometimes I need to steer the conversation to that area, because it's very important, and some students get it. Some I've had real successes with, from beginning to approach our talks and our sessions from that point of view, because I've said to a lot of us, if you know the pentatonic scale up and down, you've got all you need to get your message across. That's all you need.
Yeah. That's right. Well, that's really well put, actually, Geoff, because that is the thing. It's like, I always think about people like Hendrix and characters like that as the anomalies. We get this sort of idea, well, we do this and that scales, blah, 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 blah. And that's the path we take. And then suddenly you get this person over here who's doing something completely different. If you think of Hendrix in the time that he appeared, you've got all these, guitarists who are incredible players, the Wes Montgomerys and all the rest of it, just doing their thing. And then he turns up and he upends everything. He effectively creates the sound of the electric guitar in, as we know it as rock music.
Yeah.
And sort of changes the whole landscape.
Yeah.
But he doesn't come from a traditional way of playing it. There's a lot of the skills that he's got under his fingers, which you can look at and go, well, there's the rock and roll thing, and there's the blues thing, and the R&B thing, blah blah blah. Right? It's all there, but it always sounds like him, which goes to what you're saying. What have you got to say?
Yeah.
Have you got a voice? Musical.
Have you got a message?
Have you got a message? Exactly. What have you got to say? And of course, for a lot of kids, well, not just kids. I mean, this is really difficult for adults, actually.
Yeah.
What have you got to say? Because, well, I don't know, because I'm always saying what I've been told to say, type of thing. Education.
Yeah.
And I think.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, but I think that was really well put, what you said.
Yeah, thanks.
Because I've seen that is exactly how I see it. And the ones who sort of do really well are the ones who are rather cack-handed about stuff. They're the lazy sods who don't learn their scales properly, but they can just sit down and create something, or they'll pick something off a record and run with it.
Yeah, it's almost that sort of poetic quality. Some people that have just got it, in a musical sense.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
I totally agree with you.
And you don't have to teach them or coach them with that, or get them to think, because that's just naturally how they see it. But you're right; they can be real lazy sods.
Yeah, that's it. From a point of view of following a syllabus, they're a nightmare.
Yeah.
So this is why I often say, when I'm teaching, the syllabus is just a structure. The idea is there's the information. Now run with that and see what you come back with, you know. But yeah, so going back then to where you are, you started gigging, and so where does is there a point where you can go, yeah, that was my first proper gig that I put on for myself, or the band that was nothing to do with my dad's stuff or whatever? Where's that point?
Oh, look, I actually got handed the bass guitar at one point.
I see a bass in the corner of your room.
Yeah, I still have a bass, and I use that largely for doing demos, but I'll pick it up and sort of slap around there a little bit. And for several years, I thought that was my path in music, was to be a bass player, and I was perfectly happy doing it. But I was struggling to get it together with an electric guitar, which I didn't get till I was. So I'd started playing when I was 10. I didn't get an electric guitar till I was 15. My mum and dad had promised me one. Actually, I'll tell you this little story, but it must have been when I was around 12, where I was so sure that Christmas morning I was so sure that it was electric guitar was coming, because I'd shown mum and dad that I'd learnt stuff. I had to play them Rebel Rouser.
Oh, right.
I think that was the only electric guitar song that they knew anything of. So I played Rebel Rouser for them on the acoustic guitar. Right. And then I'm like, yes, electric guitars in the bag. So that Christmas morning, so probably about 1977, I come down and there's no electric guitar there. And eventually my dad's come and given me this square box, and I've unwrapped it, and there was a little guitar amplifier in there, but I didn't know what it was. So I'm like, well, what's this? And Dad said, well, that's an amplifier. And I'm like, well, what's an amplifier? So it's a radio? I didn't know what it was. You know? And he said, well, the bloke at the shop said, you know, an electric guitar is no good without an amplifier. And then there was another little gift, which was a smaller thing. I've unwrapped that, and it was like wires and things. I didn't know what that was. And it was an adhesive pickup. So you'd stick. So Dad said, well, we couldn't afford an electric guitar and an amplifier. Yeah. So what they did was they bought the little amp and the little adhesive pickup, and that was my rig for the next 3 years. So I was stuck with that acoustic guitar, and now I can see that it was probably a good thing, because it really strengthened my fingers playing acoustic guitar for all that time.
Yes.
And when I finally got the electric, you know, it was like, you know.
No, it's amazing. Yeah. It is. It's incredible, isn't it? If you have to play an acoustic guitar and work things out. I had an old classical.
Right.
That I you know, sat down and worked out guitar solos, you know, from Freddie King or Hendrix or whatever off the record, and played it on acoustic, you know, Rory Gallagher or whatever. And of course trying to do string bending, and okay, it was not that wasn't bad, but it just, because you know, everything was there, and because once you got onto an electric, it was like, oh my god.
But a different world. But for all that, I was in a band that didn't have a bass player, and a fellow that became my first great musical mentor, a guy called Alan Watson. He came along to see our little dance band, and he sat in for the rehearsal. At the end of it, he said, well, it's good. He said, but you really need a bass player. And we all looked at each other like we were so ignorant. We were like, what's a bass player? We had no idea. No. But I wound up with a bass guitar. There's just this cheap little thing with no branding on it or anything. And I was playing bass the next rehearsal, and I was really comfortable on it, because I knew that this little pentatonic box, and I could just make up riffs. And so I actually really enjoyed it, because I felt like I could improvise more than I could on the guitar. Yeah. And everyone was sort of perfectly happy to just let me play the root note, and then you know, just sort of play whatever I wanted. And I was on the bass until I was about, 20 or 21. I was a bass player.
Right. Good.
And because I had a bass guitar, I think not because I was such a good bass player, but because I had a bass guitar, I got involved in all sorts of bands. I played in jazz bands and rock bands and country rock bands and dance, all sorts of stuff, because everyone wanted a bass player. So it was great grounding for me.
I like that story.
Yeah. But I did return to the guitar when I heard when I first heard the blues, which was and it was electric blues guitar, and it was played by Eric Clapton on the Blues Breakers album. Somebody put that disc on. I was playing a gig,
blowing, isn't it, when you first?
And that's exactly the word. Absolutely blew my mind.
Yeah,
that opening riff for All You Love I whatever conversation I was having, I just left, went to the record, and it was a record player. And I remember my head going around like that, trying to read what was on the label, and I don't know whoever was in charge of the record player, brought it over and said, this is the blues. And so that was the first time that I heard that kind of sound. And it's just that raw intensity, and the guitar is so high up in the mix where it should be. And I decided from that point that is what I want to do. That gave me focus, absolute focus. And I think for a short time I was talking to local guitar players and playing them this music and saying, I want to put a band together that does this. And nobody wanted to do it because it was the early 80s and they were all headed down the new wave path.
Right.
Everyone was getting big hair and playing ant music and Devo and shit like that. I hated it all. Well, I just wasn't into it. I returned to the guitar, started to learn the licks myself.
Yeah. Because I think it's amazing. There's certain sounds. I know certainly a friend of mine had the Beano album, which is the one you're talking about. And and that sort of the guitar sound that literally just comes out of. It's just unbelievable, isn't it?
Yeah.
The knockout sound,
just explodes out of the speakers.
Yeah, Hideaway and all that. And we, used to sort of try to work out what the hell was going on with that. But the other thing was that then I started getting hold of, because we had obviously some really good record shops not far from us. We could go up to London and go to places like Dobell's and get B.B. King and Freddie King stuff, because it was like, this song's written by Freddie King. So then that starts you going down that rabbit hole, and lots of that stuff was on import. So, so it was brilliant. So so started. It's interesting, and the other song, actually, I must say, and I don't know, it had the same impact on you. It was the first time I heard "Sunshine of Your Love."
Oh yeah.
That the guitar sound on that, you go like, not even from this world.
It was our resident guitar hero at high school showed me that riff.
Yeah,
that was the first time I'd ever played that pentatonic riff with the flattened fifth. He showed me that, and I went home and I just played it for hours and hours, just going bong, 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 just over and over and over again. It's like, it just sounds so good.
It's amazing. It's amazing. Yeah. So that's good reminiscing. So,
but I guess I then studied that album, and I got hold of a bunch of others. I had a friend of mine gave me a stack of blues albums when he discovered because they were really hard to get.
Yeah.
I grew up in a little country town, way out in the sticks, and so I never saw a gig when I was growing up. You know, there were no bands to go and see or anything like that. So I was completely naive, and everything that I heard on these records it just sounded like a wonderland, and like I said, that mystery, that mystique that went with it. But he gave me a stack of albums, and in there were the other two Blues Breakers albums that came afterwards, so Hard Road and Crusade, and so Peter Green and then Mick Tuff. So I was completely fascinated with that whole story and how the band. It was different people on each one, but it was always John Mayall and the Blues Breakers. Yeah. And but he also had the Allman Brothers live at Fillmore East and Freddie King's Texas Cannonball. And Woman Across the River. So they were the Leon Russ.
That album,
Shelter album,
was so cool. Because again, it was almost like it was like a relaunch of him, really. Woman Across the River album. And that was, I saw a clip of him on Old Grey Whistle Test, which was a program we used to have. And that was just before that album came out, and I had to get that imported. That one. That's such a, and the title track's brilliant, isn't it?
And that was like his funk rock.
Yeah. I think who did you have on keyboards? Because it was.
I know you're testing me.
Leon Russell, was it somebody like that on keyboards?
Well, I think Leon played on the albums, but his touring band always seemed to be different. To the studio band. Because I know Jim Keltner played drums on Texas Cannonball, and he may have even done on Woman Across the River as well, because he did 3 Shelter albums, and then he did one for Mike Vernon, Burglar. Which was done in England, I'm guessing was done in England. And Burglar was a great album as well. And that may have been his last one. But that was my introduction to Freddie King. I hadn't heard the earlier, like early 60s albums that he did for King and so on, until much later. But look, those albums I just basically studied, learned, taught myself to play as best I could. And look, even though I wasn't a great guitar player, talk about the knowing the pentatonic scale. I was a pentatonic wonder. I didn't know much else, but I loved this music so much, and then I moved to the big city when I was 22, which was Melbourne, and I put a little band together. We started gigging around the place. We were just doing covers of Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf, and pretty much the same set list as any of the other blues bands around. But there was a guy called Dutch Tilders who, now to us, he was this ancient old guy. He was this ancient old blues man. And everyone talked about him. When I first arrived, I'd never heard of him, but everyone talked about him so much that I went along to see him. And he started up just after I walked through the door, and I was with my girlfriend, and within 4 bars, I think, of him playing, my jaw had just hit the floor. He just sounded so real and authentic. He meant it, and he knew it backwards. He was so confident and charismatic, and he was given the message. You know, he was telling everybody, "This is what the blues is about. So you better listen." And I turned to my girlfriend. And I said, "I don't know how, but that's the guy I need to get to know." Because it was almost like I could see he held the key to my future. And so I became a devotee, and eventually, word got out. A few people had seen me play with my band, and they told Dutch, "Look, that kid's he plays all right. You should get him up." And he got me up to play on one of the sets, and we just hit it off musically. And like I say, I wasn't the best guitar player around, but I think I understood what he was about. I understood his message, and I gave him room. I never played at the same time that he was singing, which he hated.
Yes.
And I responded to what he was singing. I didn't just blow the loudest solo I could when I got a chance. I backed him up, and and I listened to what he was saying, whether it was the actual words or whether it was how he was putting them across. And my guitar playing was a response to what he was singing. And because of that, I got the gig. When his guitar player left, I was the guy that got the call. And that is the biggest lesson that I can pass on to any young kids that are wanting to know how to play.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? Because music's so sort of, well, psychological or whatever you call it. It's not, it's all the stuff that you don't say and you don't do, that sort of thing. And that's a good example of that. I mean, blues is absolutely all about that. In fact, I used to play a lot of reggae as well, because obviously a really big thing in London and all the rest of it. And reggae's like that. It's what you don't do. And it's all the space and just really locking in, really listening to what's going on with the rhythm section and just whether you're the vocalist or the guitarist or whatever, it's about the sort of the atmosphere in the room type of thing.
Yeah.
And and of course, when you going back to the thing about kids now, because a lot of the things with music courses, I mean, how do you teach that? You can't. You can only, it's, as you say, it's being aware, isn't it?
Yeah, well, either you know how to listen or you don't, and it can take a lot. Like I've had musicians in the band who have been recommended to me, and they know a lot about their instrument. They've got a lot of, they can play licks. And I'm talking about drummers, bass players, keyboard players, and I've had a few of them who have come highly regarded, and some of them great professionals. But sometimes at the end of it, if they haven't been listening to what the rest of the band is doing, and because I'm the band leader, particularly if they're not listening to what I'm doing, I just pay them their money at the end of it, and I say thanks very much. But but a lecture on listening at that stage, I think, is going to be lost.
Yeah, absolutely. So this collaboration then, where you work, you're playing guitar. How long did you do that for?
Oh, look, so Dutch, playing with Dutch was, I really felt like I'd become a professional at that stage.
Yeah.
I'd been doing a few little jobs in between having gigs, and but I was so determined to get to a point where I could make a living as a guitar player, and Dutch gave me that chance once I was in his band, because he in Australia he was our resident blues legend. And when I say like I said earlier, he was, to us, he was this ancient old blues guy. He was 48 when I met him, right? And I worked with him. It was at least 6, maybe 7 years. So 1989, I joined his band, and then I left twice. I think I left in 96 and then got back together in 97 for a few gigs. So 6, 7 years. We did a couple of reunions later down the track, but but I was just employed to play lead guitar for the Dutchman, and they were great days. Did all my first real touring trips, and we would go up and down the east coast of Australia, which is it's probably like driving from Edinburgh to Spain, distance, and flew across to the west, and we did all sorts of gigs and festivals on a regular basis. We hold down this was back in the days when bands would have hold down residencies in their hometown, like weekly residencies, and we at any one time we usually had 4 or 5 residencies, and that's what we do every week. when we weren't on the road.
Mm.
Yeah, so they were great days, and because all I had to do was play guitar, I just practiced and just tried to get better and better. And in the meantime, I was putting work into. I would come up with ideas for songs, so I was putting my own material together.
Mm.
Yeah, and eventually, I think I put my first demo recording together in 1993, and released that as an independent album in '94. So I was still playing with Dutch, but it was sort of like a side project, doing my own thing.
Yeah.
Mm.
So when did you sort of leave? Well, you said you left before, but when did you sort of leave that and then become the solo?
Well, okay, so there's probably a couple of things happening at the same time, because while Dutch was the main gig, I also developed a solo acoustic
Right.
gig. I actually didn't own an acoustic guitar at the time, but we had a regular gig at a place called I know there was a famous Station Tavern in London. We had one in Melbourne, Station Tavern in Paran, and that was our regular Sunday gig. And the governor pulled me aside at the end of one of the gigs with Dutch, and he said, "Look," he said, "I want to ask you a question." He said, "We're thinking of doing a Friday night after work drink session between 5 and 7 of a Friday night before the main band comes on in the evening, just to keep people here having a drink. We just want to get a solo acoustic guitar player to do that." And I'm thinking, "Oh yeah, all right." And he said, "I was thinking you must know somebody." and of course I said, well, I could do that. And he's like, "Oh, you play acoustic guitar?" I said, yeah, of course I do. And then I got home and was just like, all right, how do I get an acoustic guitar? I had to get an acoustic guitar in the next week and get a repertoire together.
Yeah.
So yeah. So and there's a lesson there, if you're ever if there's ever a gig going, just say,
never turn down an opportunity.
Yep, I can do that. I'll be there, and then figure it out.
That's I think that's a good message for people at the moment.
Yeah.
Look at everything.
There's also that situation where somebody offers you a gig that maybe you weren't thinking of, like later on. The first time I got offered to teach at Jorma Kalkinen's Fur Piece Ranch, which was in the States a few years later. And I hadn't done much teaching at that point, and I didn't think I could. But that same little switch kind of went off, and I just sat there and I went, "Yeah, oh, sure. Yep, I could do that. Yep. Mm-hmm." And then you quietly go back to your hotel room and freak out, like, "Yeah, how am I going to do that?" That's one that became another gig that just kept on giving once I started. But that doing that acoustic gig for a few years, so I developed those skills that I had on the acoustic guitar early on. All that came back, and I had to develop my finger style all over again, which was the first thing that guitar teacher showed me. And so I began.
Amazing, isn't it?
Again, and just I built my strength back up again fairly quickly, because I'd been playing these light strings on the electric, and then I started to develop my repertoire there. And then some years later, I had the opportunity to go to Memphis and play at the International Blues Challenge. But our blues society in Melbourne could only afford one air ticket. So if you're going to do it, you had to do it as a solo musician.
Right.
Because they couldn't send a band over there. They just didn't have the funds.
Brilliant.
So I did that as an acoustic guitar player, and it turned out on the day that we did, I was the only acoustic musician. Every other act was a band. Amazing. But I got up there and I had 10 minutes. Every act only had 10 minutes. So I did these two songs. I did one which was both my compositions, but one was more of a sort of a traditional sounding blues style, kind of Robert Johnson sort of style.
Yeah.
And the other was this real flashy train rhythm thing where I speed it up and sort of do all flashy licks and everything. And I won the Albert King Award. So I got this big award at the end of it. And the boss of the Gibson Guitar Company was there. And I think he'd had a few drinks, had a few sherbets. And so he offered me a guitar endorsement, offered to give me a couple of Gibson guitars. All I had to do was get to the factory.
Yeah.
And so I took their card, and I had to go home almost immediately. This is one of the difficult things of living in Australia, is that every time you go home, it's like this bloody great 24-hour trip to get back to the other side of the planet.
Yeah.
And back in those days, we were keeping in touch via fax and via these very expensive phone calls every now and again. But we kept in touch, and when I was finally able to go back so that was 95 when I did the competition, and then in 97 I was able to get back and visit the factory in Bozeman, Montana, and they gave me these two guitars. That's one of them. I got one of them right here.
Oh wow!
Still play it.
Cool.
That's my #1 acoustic guitar. But that's bloody hell, 23 years. That's been my main squeeze.
Yeah.
So very nice. Yeah, but even that, just with that little story, that even that is a lesson. I'll bring that up with particularly young students who are like doing these competitions. You get these talent competitions, blues talent. People say, music isn't a competition. How can you? But they incentivize.
Yes.
And get people to brush up their performance. It gives them something to aim for. And even if you're not the big winner, and for me, I wasn't the big winner on that day. I did get a little prize, which is also actually it's a big prize because it's international. But it was the smallest trophy on the day.
Yeah.
But more than that, even if that hadn't happened, I think I still would have made that connection with Gibson because he really liked he took a shine to me for whatever reason. Yeah. And that's what it brings. It gives you a chance to really brush up on your performance for a specific purpose. But you may not win the big prize, but you'll meet people, and someone that does think that you're the best will maybe make that connection.
Yeah, so, that's absolutely spot on. Talking about connections, then. So, when was the first time you came to England?
So that was 97. It was actually the same trip where I went to the Gibson factory. So and what I had planned to do was to move to London. I had family in England. I had and my mum's English. So that was a place that I was able to go to. And I've got, the stamp in my passport. I would be able to move to England and live and work there if I chose to. I'd never been there before, but I decided that was worth having a go because Australia is a very small. Whilst it's a large island, it has a very small population, comparatively speaking, and so our market, particularly for blues music, is very limited. You can only go so far. So whilst I've been to the States a couple of times, it's very difficult to work there if you don't have a green card or something like that. So I saw England as the opportunity, but I was let me back up a little bit. So I felt I'd done as much as I could in Australia. I saw England as an opportunity to get into Europe and so on, just a larger population centre, but fully aware that I was most likely going to have to start all over again. Went to America on the way there, picked up the guitars from Gibson. So I had a little bit behind me. I had a couple of recordings that I'd made. I had this Gibson endorsement. And we had a contact with a fella in London. Someone had given me his number. I won't mention his name, but he was in the music industry, and whoever gave me the number said, get in touch with this guy. He'll look after you. I had a conversation with him on the phone before I got there, and he said, look, I can set you up with a band, and I can set you up with a tour, and I can set you up with some recording dates. He said, it's going to cost me probably about, what was it, 900 quid at the time. He said, if you send me that in advance, I'll get it all set up and ready to go, and then we'll take that, you can pay back, I'll pay you back that 900 quid out of the first month of commissions. And he butted me up and told me he really liked my music and thought I was the next big thing and all that sort of stuff. So I get there and I go over to meet him. He was surprised that I was there when I called him. He was kind of shocked that I'd actually turned up. And I went round to his house, and I think within 10 minutes I realised he was a total dropkick. He was a big mouth, and
amazing.
He was a crook. He was a thief. He'd totally screwed me. So that was a big learning curve. So basically I had, I had nothing. I'd lost my money, and I had nothing. So I just went to open mic nights and jam nights and all sorts of things. And one of the guys I met at one of the jam sessions was a guy called Sam Kelly. He's a drummer. I think very well. And
very well. Yeah.
And of course, I knew nothing about Sam, but I think I've got a diary entry at the time, and I would rarely write in the diary, but there is a diary entry somewhere where I've written down the night after playing with this guy, Sam Kelly, and I've just met the most amazing drummer, and I just felt like it was like that thing I was talking about with Dutch Tilders, where we musically we just clicked, we just connected. He reacted to everything I played, I reacted to what he played. It was like we were conversing with each other on a musical level, and it's one of those things that Sam has had that naturally. Nobody's taught him how to do it. He's listening and he's reacting to what's going on around him.
That's good. So did Sam then start to connect you up with some other people that?
No, I actually didn't see Sam for. I maybe hooked up with him at a couple of 3 jam sessions in that time that I was in London, and I was living with a couple of fabulous fellas. There was a Kiwi and an Aussie guy that had a place in Battersea. So that was Pete and Wags. They had this place, and it had become sort of a halfway house for Aussies and Kiwis that were passing through London.
Yeah.
And so my bed was rolled up behind the lounge room door. So every night I'd have to wait for the last person to go to bed, and then I'd roll out my bed and I could go to sleep, and then I'd be up as soon as someone got up. But that's where I lived for 3 months in London, just trying to get something going. Met a few people, had a few little gigs and things here and there, but it just wasn't happening. And I think I was so despondent that I'd been ripped off, and I was embarrassed by it as well. I felt like I'd really been done over, and I just walked into it. But I'd made a contact with a booking agency in Portland, Oregon, and they kept in touch with me, and eventually they said, so how's it going over there? And I'm like, look, it hasn't really worked out. They said, well, you'd be really welcome back here. So eventually I decided I was going to move back there, and I think 2 days before I was due to fly out, I filled in for a guy called Gwyn Ashton. Gwyn had double booked himself, and so he asked if I'd fill in for him at Doug Ravel's gig in Sevenoaks. And so Doug agreed. I don't think he was happy about it, but he agreed for me to dep for Gwyn. So I turned up at this little pub in Sevenoaks called the Anchor, and I think it was about 4 people in the bar, because Gwyn wasn't playing after all. But Gwyn also called John Adams, who had Bottleneck Blues Club, and he said to John, he said, go and see my mate Geoff. He's playing at the Anchor down the road. And John grumbled a bit, but decided he'd go and check it out. and again, and like after doing so many open mic nights, so many audition nights and jam sessions and things like that, suddenly I play in this little bar with 4 people in there, and John.
Yeah, in Sevenoaks, which is like, you think, okay, right.
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
not really the musical centre of the universe, apart from the fact that Rotor Sound are there. But
yeah, but I was only there. I was just doing it for the 40 quid or whatever it was.
yeah,
Yeah, but John bought me a Guinness after my set, and he said, "Well, I want to book you to play the Bottleneck Blues Club." And I said, "Well, sorry, mate. I'm glad you want to book me, but I'm leaving in 2 days, and I don't think I'll be back." I had a gutful, you know. The London experience had kind of kicked me in the guts that first time round, just at the hands of that one guy. And anyway, John and I kept in touch while I had my Portland, Oregon experience, and eventually he brought me back about a year later, and we did 9 dates. And it was the first tour that he'd done, and he admitted it was a lot more difficult than he thought it would be, booking an unknown artist. But for whatever reason, he totally got where I was coming from. He totally got what I was trying to do. And and there's a lot to be said for that too in the music industry. It's based more on relationships and connections than it is with, you know, working out the hit record formula.
Yeah.
Or, you know, wearing the right clothes or playing the right stuff at the right time. It's got more to do with, you know, those honest human relationships where you just really know what you're on the same wavelength and you want the same thing. So yeah, and I worked with John for the next 14 or 15 years, and ups and downs, but it was, you know, just great, just a really amazing adventure. Just successive visits. I'd come over and do a tour every year, and we had, you know, guys in the band and these wonderful places that we'd play. Some worked, some didn't. Some were amazing, some were, you know, but that's the path as well. You know?
Yeah, that's great, isn't it? Because obviously Sam's in the band. Sam Coe's in the
band.
Oh
yeah, and he recruited Sam. It was actually the second time around. The first tour that we did, we had there was an Australian guy called James Meston, Sweet Baby James Meston, and I'd become very good mates with James because we were both Aussies trying to make a go of it in London. He put the first band together with a wonderful drummer called Adam Roman and Javier. I can't remember his surname, and I won't try to guess. Javier. He was a bass player from Spain, and he was great. And they were great guys, but I think we only did 2 gigs on that first 9-date tour. All the other shows were acoustic shows. But the next year, I think John's actually seeing me perform with a band as well. Had a better handle on what that was about, because he hadn't seen me do anything but the acoustic thing to that point. And the next year, he got Sam, Dave Clark on bass, and Dave Lennox on keyboards, and became the UK Soul Diggers. And thankfully, that band was recorded on a live in the studio album that John put together and produced. And I'm so glad he did, because the band was at its peak, and it still sounds really good. There's a real slice of history there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. Yeah, because obviously I knew John before the Bottleneck Blues Club, actually.
Right. Okay.
And so because he was doing stuff really because he was passionate about it. It wasn't because, as you say, it wasn't a music business perspective, if you see what I mean. It was to do with the fact that he loved the blues.
I'll tell you what, up to that point, Vic, being a young being a young person in the music industry, I had a succession of potential managers and record labels buttering me up, and everyone was talking about the hit records and the millions that we were going to make, and the number one with a bullet, and those conversations were always about that, and I just hated it. And I was in the almost there signing my name on the bottom of the contract after discussions like that with one particular label, who had grandiose ideas that they never would have been able to deliver, but their one thing was like, we will choose what the single will be. You can do whatever else you want to do, but we will choose what the single would be. And it was like just before I was due to sign this bloody contract, they decided it was the single was going to be a cover of This Guy's in Love with You by the Herb Alpert song, which is a beautiful song.
Yeah, but not exactly the song that you would. No.
Blues guitar player, you know. That's not what I said to him. I said, the worst case scenario for me is that we do This Guy's in Love with You and it becomes a smash hit around the world. That'll destroy me for the rest of my life.
Absolutely, because you'd always have to do it. Yeah. I've often thought about that when you see people that are still doing songs they recorded 30, 40 years ago, and they have to do, or the more successful they are, the more songs they have to do.
Yeah.
Nightmare.
Yeah. Yeah.
Particularly if it's one of those songs. I mean, I thought the classic one of that is Jeff Beck and Hi Ho Silver Lining.
Oh yeah.
And okay, he managed to avoid never to do the song, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
But again, why give him that song? It's bizarre, isn't it?
Oh, and get him to sing it. I mean,
yeah,
I imagine he hates it.
He does.
Yeah.
Apparently,
it's so not him.
Yeah, but you can imagine, couldn't you? It's not, but it got to number one. You think, God,
It was number one in England, really.
I think so. Yeah, pretty sure it was. Yeah.
When I first arrived in England, and I was getting to know my family over there and meeting other people, and of course to a lot of people that aren't in the blues and roots scene, that's a complete mystery to them. No idea what you're talking about. You're talking about Albert Collins and Stephen Vaughan and Muddy Waters. They've never heard it. They've no idea what you're talking about. But so they would ask me things like, so what musicians do you like if you're not into what was the big band at the time from Manchester that were like the Beatles? Oasis, yeah, they were the big thing at the time, and I was largely ignorant as to who they were or what they did. It just didn't interest me. I just didn't listen to mainstream radio. But yeah, it's like, no, it sounds reasonably unoffensive. Yeah, that's all right. It didn't impress me or anything. So they pushed me. So what are you into? And so I'd be trying to think of people that they might have heard of. I'd say, well, Jeff Beck. I love Jeff Beck. You would have heard of Jeff Beck. And it used to really puzzle me that they'd come back with like, oh, Hi-Ho Silver Lining. Oh, so you like that kind of thing. And I'd be like, I'd never heard of that song.
No.
I'd never heard of it. I didn't know what they were talking about.
Well, that's what I mean, because amongst guitarists, Jeff Beck is like, the man, Yeah. But to everybody else, they've never heard of him,
Yeah. He's a one-hit wonder.
Yeah. One-hit wonder that's gone on forever, with all these incredible albums and, collaborations with different people that nobody's, obviously people would have heard the stuff, but they didn't realise necessarily he was playing guitar on a track, Private Dancer by, Tina Turner.
Yeah, right, yeah.
They would have heard of that and that incredible guitar that suddenly appears out of nowhere.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of people interested in music, if you sort of hear, obviously, if you sort of dig deep enough. I was in a pub the other night with the guy from Rotor Sound, Jason Howe, and they're in Sevenoaks. So
right.
That's the only thing in Sevenoaks really, apart from a lot of rich people. But we were in this pub having a chat, and somebody came up and he said, "Oh, we got this girl coming in to sing, and she sounds just like Beth Hart." And you go like, "Okay." So suddenly you get somebody talking about a singer that's not mainstream. You know, she works. Beth does a lot of stuff with her, but so there are people out there, but they're you sort of have to be in the right place in the right conversation. And the great thing about being here is that you're not actually very far away from somebody who's a famous person.
Yeah,
I've gone off. I do a lot of examining work. I haven't been doing that a lot recently, but back a few years ago, I did a lot of examining work, and I travel a bit, you know. So doing guitar exams in somewhere like Greece, and there's some great players out in Greece, but of course they've got nowhere to play, and they're interested if you come from England, you know. And I had a couple of people say to me things like, "Do you know," you know, because English is such a place, right. "Do you know so-and-so?" And one person went, I can't remember how the conversation went, but it was something about, "Where do you live? Do you live near, you know, wherever?" And I said, "Well, actually, where I live is quite near where Jeff Beck lives." And the two hits the, you know, and it's like, and occasionally you do see some hot rod going down the road that somebody's built, and because he's great at building cars, you know. And a friend of mine sort of bumps into him. You know, it's just one of those sort of crazy things that happens. You know, bumps into him in a petrol station. You know, and it's sort of weird. So it is strange. Music is a peculiar thing. You get interesting sort of like you're talking about John and everything. You know, and it's strange how these connections happen.
Yeah,
you know, you know, they seem by chance, you know, and I'm intrigued by all this stuff where you know, 2 days before you're about to leave, you meet somebody that then you know, trajectory in your life. So what's the situation now? Because I'm sort of watching the time a bit, because we've already it's you know, hour and 15 minutes. So where are you with everything, with your playing and stuff? Because at the moment you're sort of stuck.
Yeah.
In lockdown.
Yeah. In some ways, I'm very thankful that just before all this went down, I got my little home studio together. Yeah. That's what I did last summer. And that was a response to seeing how the music industry was going. Like we've noticed, like streaming is becoming so prevalent amongst consumers that it's becoming less and less profitable to make and release recordings. So it's like, okay, well, we've got to cut the costs big time. So I've just upped the equipment I've got, and even then it's pretty modest. You know, I'm just using a laptop, but I just needed a couple of reference speakers and a microphone and a set of headphones that were just of a certain quality. Anyway, we've been recording since we've been put in lockdown. I've been able to record music with the other guys in my band here, and they're all in a similar situation. Our drummer Jerry, he's had a home studio for quite some time, so he's become the elected producer because he really knows what he's doing. He knows how to mix, and he's got better situations. So we've actually released 3 songs, and we're doing this not so much as a money-making thing, but just to stay connected and engaged with our audience, and to spread a bit of joy.
Yes, spread the love.
Yeah, give people at least in our network a bit. Well, here's some new music. It's just one song at a time, but we're tending to do them with a video. I put a couple of music videos together myself.
Yeah.
Just with what I have here, and then the last one we had a videographer came on board, so we're just trying to carry on. I'm still in contact with my people in England, so Sam and his partner Diane, Paul Jobson, our keyboard player, and Andy Hodge, our bass player. So we keep in reasonably regular contact because I am keen to get back and tour again. I'm not sure when it will happen, and of course I've got my friends in America as well. My manager for the last 20 years over there, Nancy, she's in Atlanta, Georgia. And my wife and I lived over there for a while. So we've got a lot of friends there, but we're really, really concerned about our ability to get back there in the near future.
Yeah, well, I think things will, it'll be different. But,
yeah.
I think as a musician is able to be adaptable, which you obviously
yes, I guess that,
you'll get something happening.
I
mean, the things are just going to be different the way that people think about things, do stuff.
Yeah, they're certainly different at the moment, Vic. But that's how we're we're adapting at the moment and still able to release music that we've been really proud of. The quality's there, and we've been getting a really nice reaction from our people in our network. Oh, and I do the occasional online concert, which was really weird at first. And the first couple, I think I was sideways, and then I was back to front.
yeah.
And all.
I understand that. I'm crap with technology as well. So seriously, and you sort of you do something and you go. I mean, I won't bore you with my woes, but it's a similar thing. You do something and you think could have been better, or whatever. Yeah. You learn as you go, and you learn quick, don't you?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you just got to carry on and find a way. Yeah.
Well, thanks, Geoff. That was brilliant. It was a lovely chat. Really good. And you're looking well. You're looking really well. So.
Well, thanks, mate. Well, like I say, spring is here now.
Yeah.
So I've been able to get out in the backyard and sort of work away a bit out there. There's plenty to do, and I'm just trying to stay as inspired as I can, as creative as I can, and as thankful as I can be as well. Because even though 2020 has been up shit creek, but look, I'll go right back to what we were talking about at the start. I've got a roof over my head. I've got food in the cupboard. I've got people I like to be in the house with, being my wife and my son, and I mean, you just got to be grateful for everything you got.
Totally. Absolutely. Totally. I mean, it's been a couple of years of weirdness for and I think for a lot of people, because we've economically it's been bizarre as well. So and over here we've got the Brexit debate. We've been numbed into sort of almost a sort of state of shock anyway. So it's weird. Well, so it's icing on the cake for us.
Yeah, it was interesting at the start of the year. The biggest topics here were climate change. The bushfires. Bushfires. So the worst we've ever seen, and we may be getting more this year, but it hasn't been spoken about at all this year. It's all been COVID. And people are still suffering. The usual things. People that we've lost due to other illnesses, but look, I see our job in the music industry as one as we are in charge of morale.
Exactly.
And it's important to keep people positive and put some enjoyment out there. And even if you do have a message, to do it in a way that is thoughtful, not not insightful, and
Totally.
yeah. So we're just doing the best we can. Yeah.
That's great. All right, so it's brilliant to talk to you, Geoff, and wish you all the very best. And hopefully, when you're over this neck of the woods,
I hope so. And I've got my passport renewed, so
that's good.
I'm ready to go as soon as.
Hopefully, we might have a few things, maybe project-wise, that we might be able to do. Hopefully, with regard to everything, that's really good. So
terrific.
That's good. Thanks ever so much.
All right, mate. Have a great day. See you later.
Cheers. I really enjoyed talking to Geoff. That was good fun. Obviously this was recorded a couple of weeks ago, but Melbourne is still in lockdown. I think somebody was saying to me it's about 190 days up to and counting. That's not good for a musician. But anyway, he's been through a lot of trials and tribulations, as he said. Good. So with that, on that positive note of overcoming trials and tribulations, until next time. See you then.